The Continuing Desire. The Next Chapter. By Davi'Aunna Watson. Prologue. Before the bloom. Before the mansion. Before the empire. Before the children called my name like a lifeline. There was only the boy. A boy who learned to walk not on steady ground, but through the debris of betrayal. A boy who knew the taste of dirt and the sting of blood before he ever tasted sweetness. Fists clenched, eyes sharp, heart hidden. There was no room for softness in my world. The streets were my tutor, teaching me to trust only myself. And even that was a fragile thing. The darkness I walked through wasn't an inconvenience. It was a second skin. It was the language I spoke fluently. The only one that didn't ask for explanations or explanations I couldn't give. I survived in alleys where shadows whispered cruel lullabies, where promises died young, and where silence wasn't golden. It was armor. The kind of silence that drowned the screams in my head, that cut off the screams of others. It was the kind of silence that made me invisible, that kept me from being anything more than a ghost, empty and untouchable. Zane Corrin wasn't born into power. No one handed me a legacy. No one wrapped me in silk and whispered sweet nothings about greatness. I earned it, every bit of it, with bruised hands, shattered hearts, and a mind wired for war. I forged myself into the man I became, each moment of pain a hammer, strike shaping me into something the world feared, something they didn't know how to destroy. I carved my name into this world with grit and fury. Every corner I turned, every alley I ruled, every deal I made was a testament to my resolve, to my drive. I wasn't born for ease, I wasn't born for comfort, and I sure as hell wasn't born for kindness. I was born for blood, born to rise from the broken foundations of a world that devoured the weak and turned loyalty into currency. Stone by stone, lie by lie, I built my kingdom, not from privilege, but from pain. I wasn't the kind of man to take anything for granted. Every inch of my rise had to be fought for, taken, stolen if necessary. Cold, calculated, untouchable. Those were my qualities, my armor. And it wasn't that I wanted to be feared. No, it was the only language this world understood. A language I learned long before I ever understood the meaning of love. But then came her, Isabella. She walked into my storm like it was sunlight, unafraid to be burned. Where others saw destruction, she saw something more. She didn't tremble beneath the weight of my name. She didn't flinch at the fire in my past or recoil at the wreckage that trailed behind me. She didn't see a monster, a cold-blooded king of shadows. She saw something different, something broken that could be fixed. And that's where the battle started. She saw the fractures in the marble, the cracks in the armor I had spent years perfecting. She reached into places I had buried deep, the bruised spots no one dared to touch. And instead of recoiling, instead of running, she stayed. She didn't try to change me. She didn't try to fix me. She simply existed in a way that made me want to be different. She brought laughter where silence had ruled. She brought warmth where ice had long since settled. She walked into the void of my world, filling it with a presence that wasn't afraid, that wasn't interested in playing the games I had been taught to play. She was nothing like the women who came before her, and with her came something I never thought I'd have. Peace. Peace. A word I never knew, a word I never understood, but she showed me what it could be. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to run. I didn't want to push her away. I wanted to stay. I wanted to hold on to this, whatever it was, before it slipped away. It was with her that I began to see that my empire, my wealth, my ruthlessness, none of it could compare to what she brought into my life. She didn't want power. She didn't need a throne. All she needed was me. And for her, I became something else. Eventually, miraculously, came a family. Not just a title, not just a role to play, but a real, living, breathing thing. A family not built on lies or obligation, but on something deeper, something more unbreakable. We became a home, not protected by guns or stone walls, but by love that refused to break, by a bond that could not be severed. And somewhere in the middle of all the chaos and the darkness, I learned that I was capable of something I had never believed. I was capable of nurturing something good. This isn't the tale of how Zane Corin conquered the underworld. This is the story of how I conquered the war inside myself, how I traded survival for sanctuary, and how the man once made of scars and silence, who was nothing more than a weapon, learned to bloom. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen without bloodshed, without loss, without the kind of sacrifice I wasn't prepared for. But it happened, slowly, reluctantly, but it happened. And the man who had built his kingdom with fury and blood learned that there was more to life than just surviving, that there was more to a legacy than just what you could take from the world. It began in fire, but it ends, ultimately, in legacy, in love, in light. And that's where I'll start. The boy may have learned to walk alone, but the man, he will never be alone again. Chapter 1. Morning in the Fortress, Part 1. The scent of espresso and lemon ricotta pancakes wove through the Corin estate like a tender promise, a reminder that even the most formidable empires could know peace, if only within these walls. Morning sunlight spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows, warming the sprawling kitchen with a soft golden hue. Outside, the distant trickle of the marble fountain blended with birdsong and the gentle rustle of wind through jasmine vines. The air was perfumed with summer, wildflowers, warm stone, and something sweeter, more elusive, tranquility. I stood at the edge of it all, a man carved from contradictions. My past echoed within me like a whisper in a cathedral, ever present, impossible to silence. Even now, dressed in a dark, tailored tracksuit that clung to my athletic frame like silk on steel, there was no mistaking what I was. Power radiated from me in quiet pulses, like a low-burning fuse that could reignite at a moment's notice. The tattoos on my arms, visible only when the sleeves slipped back, told the stories of wars won and blood spilled. My past had been a battlefield, my name whispered with either reverence or fear. But this morning, my battlefield was domestic and shockingly beautiful. My children were chaos and comfort rolled into one. 5 living pieces of my legacy, my redemption. Alessandro, the eldest at 21, stood near the window with a tablet in hand, his sharp blue eyes scanning political briefs like a soldier preparing for war. He had inherited my intellect and Isabella's poise, lethal in the making. Already, powerful men whispered his name in meetings, sensing the rise of the next great Corin. He was a reflection of everything I had built and everything I could leave behind. At the center of the room, Evangeline and Isadora, the 17-year-old twins, painted quietly at the island, their canvas cluttered with sunflowers and pastel skies. Both stood tall at 5 feet 10 inches, a striking presence that only amplified their regal poise. Isadora's headphones dangled from one ear, lost in a world of symphonies, while Evangeline hummed softly, her smile a mirror of her mother's. They had inherited their mother's quiet brilliance and my piercing gaze. They moved through the world like artists cloaked in wisdom, with a quiet strength that few could see, except for me. Then there were the youngest, Matteo, 16, tall and gangly, who was currently tossing a blueberry between his fingers as if deciding whether to eat it or launch it at his brother. And Luca, 15, who had already eaten 3 pancakes and was eyeing a 4th like a hungry wolf. They were firecrackers, always exploding, always laughing, always testing limits. "Daddy, can we go to the stables today?" Luca asked eagerly, his voice rising above the morning hum. His dark curls bounced as he leaned forward, eyes shimmering with hope. I leaned against the counter, sipping my espresso as my eyes flicked toward Isabella. She was already on her way to swat Matteo's hand away from another pancake, the action easy, familiar, as though it had been a part of our routine forever. "We'll see, Bambino. After your lessons," I said, my voice thick with affection. "Ugh, always with the lessons," Matteo groaned, slumping in mock despair. "Discipline is the foundation of freedom," Alessandro murmured without looking up, quoting one of my old teachings. I arched a brow, amused. "Good memory. Keep that in mind when I test you on the logistics reports later." A groan echoed across the island. Isabella floated into view like sunlight made flesh, her robe cinched around her waist, curls cascading over one shoulder. There was a quiet majesty to her now, no longer the woman who once had to prove herself to powerful men, but a queen in her own right. Her laughter, as she swatted Mateo's hand away from another pancake, was the music that grounded them all. She moved like she belonged in every room, in every heart. I watched her from behind my cup, heat curling low in my belly. Years together had not dulled my desire for her. It had only refined it, made it more dangerous. She was still the only one who could undo me with a smile, disarm me with a look, and bring me to my knees with a kiss. I didn't need to touch her to feel it. Our connection had become a living thing between us, something that existed in every glance, every brush of our hands, every shared moment in this house that had become our sanctuary. Our eyes met across the kitchen. A silent conversation passed between us. She didn't need to speak for me to understand. I could feel it in my bones, the pull, the pulse, the certainty. I could be summoned by a look, wrecked by her laughter, and saved by her touch. She was still my anchor, still the one who could pull me from the depths of my darkest thoughts. Isabella's gaze lingered, a question hanging between us. Is today a good day to leave them behind? I nodded slightly. The empire could wait. The world could burn for all I cared. Right now I was just a man, a husband, a father, the former king of shadows, now imprisoned willingly in this golden cage of contentment. But even in this fortress, this haven I had built for them, the quiet whisper of danger never fully dissipated. And I couldn't help but feel it in the back of my mind. The game was never truly over. Not for me, not for us. Chapter 1 continued. Beneath the Surface, Part 2. Later, as the morning sun climbed higher, I stepped onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. The laughter from the kitchen faded into the distance, replaced by the hum of bees and the distant clatter of hooves as stable hands prepared the horses. I exhaled slowly, savoring the moment. The heat of the stone beneath my bare feet grounded me, reminded me of how far I'd come, from cold prison cells and blood-slick alleys to this haven. The scent of lavender from the nearby hedge mingled with the salt-tinged breeze drifting inland from the coast. I glanced toward the horizon, where the sea shimmered like liquid crystal. This life, this peace, felt like something stolen, something fragile. Her hand wrapped around my shoulder, a quiet gesture of comfort and connection. Evangeline, barefoot and smiling, looked up at me with quiet wonder. "You look sad, Papa." I blinked. "Do I?" She nodded. "Not in your eyes, but in your chest. I can feel it." My throat tightened. That eerie, perceptive intuition had always run deep in the twins. I looked down slightly to meet her gaze, brushing a curl behind her ear. "I'm just remembering. Bad things. I considered. Hard things. But they brought me to the best things." Evangeline kissed my cheek and ran back inside, her linen dress fluttering behind her like a banner of peace. I watched her go, then turned toward the garden gate. In the distance, past the stables, a black SUV idled at the edge of the property. Unfamiliar, out of place. It wasn't one of ours. Not part of the household staff. Not local. A flicker of instinct surged through me. Cold, sharp, ancient. I didn't move, didn't alert the guards, but my mind began to sharpen, each thought falling into calculated order. The golden cage was still gilded, but it wasn't impenetrable. Not anymore. As the breeze shifted, the jasmine no longer masked the unease that began to curl in my gut. Somewhere, beyond the safety of manicured hedges and sprawling vineyards, something stirred. And Zane Corin, once the shadow behind empires, knew better than anyone that peace, real peace, was always temporary. The game was starting again, and this time I had more than my own life to protect. I knew it would come back. That was the price of power, of building something from nothing. There are always those who would come to take it from you, who would try to tear it apart with hands that didn't understand the work it took to build it. They thought they could play the game, but they didn't know the rules. They didn't understand that a man like me could control more than just his empire. I could control the world itself, if I had to. But this time, it was different. This time, I had more to lose than just my throne. I had a family, a fragile, beautiful thing that could be broken. And I would burn the world down before I let that happen. The scent of jasmine turned to ash in my mouth. I wasn't ready for this. None of us were. But that's the thing about peace, it never lasts. Chapter 2. Echoes and Foundations. Later that morning, as the younger children disappeared into their homeschooling rooms and Alessandro helped Isabella in the garden, I retreated to my home office, a fortress of polished dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking our vast estate. The silence here was different from the kitchen's warmth. It was strategic, filled with the hum of computers and the weighty presence of ledgers. Outside, the summer sun cast long shadows across the lawn, birds occasionally breaking the stillness with brief, melodic calls. I could feel the weight of the empire I'd built pressing against the walls of this room. It wasn't oppressive, not anymore, but the quiet was always there, a reminder of the world outside these walls, of the battles fought and the scars left behind. The empire, with all its power and prestige, was a constant echo, a reminder of where I had been and what it took to get here. Antonio was already waiting for me, tablet in hand. Morning, boss. The Tokyo deal is moving faster than anticipated, and there's a new development in Milan that needs your immediate review. I didn't need to glance at the tablet to know it was important. Tokyo had been in the works for months, and Milan had its own weight. The global influence I had once sought through force and blood was now being reinforced through strategy, precision, and trust. Still, every deal, every negotiation, every development always carried the undercurrent of danger. Nothing was ever fully under control. I nodded, already scanning the data. My mind, as sharp as ever, fell into the rhythm of calculation. Decisions flowed effortlessly, and the world outside this room became a mere blur. Numbers, projections, security updates, they didn't overwhelm me. They were just part of the game I'd been playing my whole life. I'd built this empire brick by bloody brick, transforming illicit gains into legitimate global dominance. The transition hadn't been smooth. It had demanded sacrifices, some brutal, some strategic. I could still feel the ghosts of the past clawing at the edges of the present. But throughout the chaos, through it all, Isabella had remained my anchor, my compass, my quiet storm, the one voice that cut through the noise, calmed my rage, and reminded me of everything I fought for. She was my constant in a world that shifted like sand. I took the tablet from Antonio, scrolling through pages of projections and security updates. What about the new security protocols for the warehouses in Naples? I asked, my voice low, steady, a velvet threat. Old instincts died hard. Even now, legitimacy doesn't guarantee safety. Ghosts had a habit of clawing their way back, and I'd buried more than my fair share. Antonio responded swiftly, his tone efficient, professional. The sharp discipline I demanded from my inner circle was always reflected in his every word. He answered each question with precision, his confidence unwavering. We had fought battles together, both literal and figurative, and our loyalty was carved in the blood of shared victories. It was the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought, not even by power. As the meeting ended, I dismissed him with a curt nod. The door clicked softly behind him, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I leaned back in my chair, letting my gaze drift toward the window once more. The quiet of the room enveloped me, but outside there was only life. Life that I had worked tirelessly to protect, to build. And there she was. Isabella stood at the far end of the garden, her long sundress clinging to her hips as she leaned down to guide Alessandro's hands into the soil. Her dark hair fell like silk over one shoulder, catching the sunlight in waves. She laughed softly at something the boy said, her voice too far to hear, but sweet enough to stir something primal in me. I couldn't look away. There was something about watching her like this, in her element, grounded, tender, that cut straight through the layers of armor I wore. I'd spent years building walls, emotional, strategic, physical, against everything and everyone, and yet here she was, standing effortlessly in the middle of it all, weaving her own place in this world I'd built. She had seen every version of me, the ambitious boy with sharp eyes, the unforgiving king of Viridia's underworld, the measured strategist shaping a legitimate empire. And still, she chose me. Every day, without hesitation. I stood, my movements smooth but deliberate. I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt, exhaled through my nose, and left the office with purpose. I needed her, not just in the way a man craves his woman, but in the way a storm seeks landfall. There was a hunger coiled tight beneath my skin, driven not by lust alone, but by the aching need for connection, for the one thing in this world that made sense amid the chaos. 20 minutes later, Isabella was in the bedroom, brushing soil from her palms, when the door swung open. "Zane?" she asked, surprised by my sudden appearance. I didn't answer immediately. I just stood there, taking her in. Her presence filled the room like the air after a storm, steadying, calming. My presence filled the space before I even stepped inside. "You looked beautiful out there," I said finally, my voice rougher than usual. "Too beautiful." She smirked as she stepped toward me. Jealous of the dirt? Or Alessandro's gardening skills? I didn't smile, not fully, but my eyes burned. No, jealous of time. Every second not spent with you feels like theft. Her lips parted, breath catching. She hadn't expected that answer. And yet, it was so very Zane. Intense, unfiltered, all-consuming. She felt it then, that hunger just beneath the surface. It mirrored her own. The way I looked at her made her knees weaken slightly, anticipation curling low in her belly. Without another word, I crossed the room in 2 long strides, backing her against the wall. Outside, the children were still playing in the garden, their laughter drifting faintly through the open window, a soft backdrop to the rising tension behind the bedroom doors. One hand slid up her thigh, the other cradled her jaw with reverent dominance. "Zane," she started to protest, but my eyes silenced her. I was already unraveling her. "I've been thinking about you all morning," I murmured against her ear, voice low and rough. "About the way you taste, the way you sound when you fall apart in my arms." Her breath hitched, her fingers fisted into my shirt. "We shouldn't. The kids. They're occupied. And right now, all I can think about is you." My mouth crashed into hers, hungry and hot. The kiss was brutal and intoxicating, tongues clashing, breath stolen. I lifted her effortlessly, pinning her to the wall, the hard planes of my body pressing into hers. Her legs wrapped around my waist with instinctive urgency, her moans swallowed by my kiss. "Fuck, Bella," I groaned as my hand slipped beneath her dress, fingers finding her slick and wanting. "You're already soaked for me." She arched against me, head thrown back as I worked her slowly, expertly, each stroke deliberate and tormenting. Her moans filled the room, soft and sharp and sinful. I carried her to the bed, never breaking contact, laying her down with reverence and hunger. Her dress was pushed up, panties discarded, and then my mouth was on her, devouring, worshiping, consuming. I tasted her like I'd been starving. Isabella writhed beneath me, hands tangled in my hair, her cries desperate and sweet. When I finally pulled away, her thighs were trembling. And then I gave her what she craved. I slid into her with a deep, powerful thrust that stole her breath. Her gasp was caught in my kiss, our bodies moving in a fevered rhythm that defied reason. She clung to me, nails dragging down my back as she met my every thrust with equal urgency. I was everywhere, my scent, my heat, my command, and she was drowning in it, in me. "Say it," I demanded, voice gravel against her skin. "I'm yours," she gasped. Louder. "Let this house hear you. Zane, I'm yours. All of me. Always." My pace grew punishing, our bodies slamming together in a blur of sweat and fire. The bed creaked beneath us, the room filled with the sounds of possession and surrender. Until finally, with a cry that tore from her soul, she came undone beneath me. Outside, the children were still in the garden, chasing butterflies through the sun-drenched grass and laughing with Alessandro, blissfully unaware of the storm unfolding behind the master bedroom doors. And with a guttural moan, I followed. I collapsed beside her, pulling her into my arms, as we breathed together in ragged silence. For a long moment, there was nothing but our mingled sweat and the slow return to earth. Then I pressed a kiss to her shoulder, tender now. This life, everything I built, it means nothing without you. She turned to me, fingers brushing the damp hair from my brow. Then don't ever forget that, Zane Corin, because I never will. Outside, the summer sun still cast long shadows, but inside our bedroom, time stood still. And for just a while longer, the empire could wait. Our hearts beat in sync, our breath mingled, and the silence that followed was no longer one of strategy, but of sanctuary. Chapter 3. Isabella's Intuition. Isabella hummed a soft tune as she arranged a fresh bouquet of hydrangeas in the living room. The house, usually bustling with children enjoying their summer break, had a rare quiet about it. Zane was in his office, immersed in his work, and she cherished these brief moments of calm. She loved their life, the beautiful children, the comfortable home, the unwavering love of Zane. Their oldest, Alessandro, was lounging in the sunroom, a thick mafia history book open on his lap. He wouldn't begin university until the spring, but Zane had made sure all the children were still sharpening their minds and bodies. Mafia training wasn't just tradition in their world, it was survival, legacy, power. Alessandro took it seriously, as did the others. Evangeline and Isadora, their stunning 17-year-old twins, were inseparable. Isabella had caught them sparring earlier that morning, their sleek movements perfectly coordinated, a graceful dance of strength and discipline. Matteo, 16, was the quiet strategist. He preferred knives over guns, his mind sharp and observant. And Luca, just 15, had Zane's fire, impulsive, fearless, fiercely loyal. They were a family of shadows and light, molded by love but trained by necessity. And though Isabella often worried about the dangers this lifestyle could bring, she could also see how deeply it had bonded them all. The children had grown not just strong but united. Every bruise from training, every mission Zane tested them on, only strengthened their devotion to one another. Her phone buzzed. It was Lucia, Zane's mother. Isabella Cara, just checking in. Are you free for lunch next week? I miss you. Isabella smiled. Their families, once cautiously navigating the complexities of Zane's past, had become an unbreakable support system. His parents, the formidable patriarch and elegant matriarch, had embraced her like a daughter. Her own parents, once hesitant about the intensity of Zane's world, now saw the truth. He would protect Isabella with every breath in his body. Of course, Lucia. I'd love to. She paused, her gaze drifting to the family portrait on the wall. 5 beautiful children, a husband who loved her endlessly. Still, there were parts of Zane she had yet to touch. Not secrets. No, Zane didn't lie. But there were silences, moments where his eyes seemed to travel to another time, another place. She often wondered if it was about his brothers, the ones he never mentioned by name. Because the truth was, Zane hadn't lost his brothers. He had let them go. Flashback. Zane was 10 when he learned how to stop crying. His brothers, Lucas and Lamar, huddled on either side of him in a cramped attic, hiding from the storm downstairs, their aunt's drunken rage. Their mother, once vibrant and proud, had been reduced to a shell under that woman's control. And Zane had grown up too fast. At 14, Zane made the hardest decision of his life. He found a way, through forged documents, bribes, favors, to send Lucas and Lamar away. Far away. He paid off the aunt, bought silence with dirty money he shouldn't have had. He watched as the car took his brothers, ages 10 and 8, out of the city and into freedom. He never told them why. He never explained the bruises or the threats or the night he caught their aunt trying to smother their mother with a pillow. He just smiled and said, "Go live a life where no one owns you. I'll find you again someday. I promise." And he had looked, quietly, secretly. Over the years, he had eyes all over the world, watching, waiting. He refused to let the underworld take them too. Back in the present, Zane leaned over the desk in his office, fingers clasped tightly. He stared at an old photo, faded, creased, treasured, of 3 boys sitting on a swing, arms around each other. "Where are you?" he whispered. There was a knock. Alessandro poked his head in. "Dad, are you good?" Zane nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." Alessandro stepped in, his tone quiet. "We're ready, by the way. Me, Eva, all of us. The training's working. We're strong." Zane looked up, emotion tightening his chest. "So much like me, but so much better. I know, son. I'm proud of you. All of you." 3 weeks later, the sun was setting, casting golden light across the estate as Isabella set the dinner table outside. Alessandro grilled steaks, while the younger kids set up torches and music. Family dinners were sacred. Zane stood at the edge of the garden, a drink in his hand, eyes scanning the driveway as if waiting for something. He had dreamed of this moment for years, praying that somehow the thread of blood would bring them back together. Then it happened. 2 tall figures approached from the tree-lined drive, their silhouettes familiar, achingly so. Isabella looked up first, her breath catching. "Zane." He stepped out, eyes narrowing. Time slowed. The taller one was Lucas, square-jawed, with Zane's serious eyes. The other, Lamar, had a grin so familiar it twisted Zane's heart. They stopped. No words yet, just recognition. Zane took the shaky step forward. Lucas said softly, "You kept your promise." Zane didn't speak. He ran. And so did they. The 3 men crashed into each other, arms locking tight, breaths stolen by emotion. Lucas clutched the back of Zane's shirt, holding him like he'd never let go again. Lamar wept openly, his tears soaking into Zane's shoulder. "You found me," Zane rasped. "No," Lucas whispered. "We found you." We never stopped looking either. Behind them, Alessandro and the others stood frozen, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Isabella pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes glassy with tears. Zane pulled back, scanning their faces. "You're here. You're home. Both of you. And our families too," Lamar added, stepping aside. From the distance came women and children, Zane's nieces and nephews, laughing, curious, bright-eyed. One little girl clutched a stuffed lion and looked up at Zane with wonder. "Are you really Uncle Zane?" Zane dropped to one knee and opened his arms. "I am, sweetheart, and I've missed you all my life." She launched herself into his chest. Zane turned, his voice breaking. "Everyone meet your uncles." It was more than a reunion. It was a restoration, a promise fulfilled, a family reborn. Later that night, the long dinner table stretched under the stars, filled with laughter, music, and memories. Zane sat at the head, with Isabella beside him and his brothers flanking him on either side. Isabella leaned in and whispered, "Now you're whole again." Zane nodded, his heart full. Finally, and as the stars blinked to life above, Isabella watched Zane, wrapped in the arms of the brothers he had once sacrificed everything for, and knew the last missing piece of his heart had finally come home. Chapter 4: Shadows That Never Sleep. The morning after the reunion, the Corrin estate radiated a new kind of energy. Warmer, fuller, yet laced with something quieter, something unspoken. I watched them, my brothers, my children, out there on the grounds, their laughter a stark contrast to the weight in my chest. Isabella, standing on the balcony with her cup of tea, always so observant, so in tune with everything and everyone. Her gaze lingered on Lucas for longer than it should have, and I knew then she had already caught something I hadn't said aloud. "Lucas has a scar on his hand," she murmured, almost to herself. "A burn, fresh. The kind of burn you don't get unless you've been running for your life." I couldn't say it, didn't want to admit it, but the warning had been there all along. The tension in the air was palpable, an undercurrent that even the children couldn't ignore. But they had no way of knowing, no way of understanding the dangers lurking just beyond the trees. Isabella's intuition was never wrong. I could feel it too, that quiet dread tightening my chest. But we'd played this game for too long. We knew the risks, the sacrifices, and I'd made my peace with them, until Isabella's sharp eyes caught more than just the obvious. "Mom," Isadora's voice, soft but insistent, broke through my thoughts. "Eva thinks something's off too. With the uncles?" Isabella's brow arched as she turned to face her daughter. Isadora nodded, her eyes glinting with the same steely determination that I'd seen in my own reflection more times than I care to count. They're sweet, kind. But Eva caught Lucas checking the perimeter cameras last night when he thought no one was watching. She said he moved like he was still in enemy territory. Isabella's expression didn't change, but I knew she was already processing. Her mind worked faster than anyone else's. She didn't need to speak for me to know she understood. Later, I stood at the bar, mixing drinks, the faint hum of life filling the air. The children were laughing. Matteo and Luca sparring over some new trick Luca was learning, Lamar teaching him like an old pro. And yet, despite the smiles and the playful energy, the weight of what had come with Lucas and Lamar's arrival hung in the air. Isabella approached, that same calm smile she always wore, but I could see the storm brewing beneath her gaze. She kissed my cheek, her warmth a welcome comfort. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, not wanting to admit how little sleep I had actually gotten. Eventually, her gaze flickered to Lucas, who stood by the tree line, his posture rigid, eyes scanning. Something wasn't right. She knew it, and so did I. "Your brothers, they seem happy." "They are." I said the words, but even I could hear the hesitation in them. Barely there, but they're all the same. And Isabella, of course, heard it too. That night, as the house settled into the familiar hush that only late hours could bring, I retreated to my study. The fire burned low, the only light casting long shadows across the room. The quiet was too heavy, and as always, the silence gnawed at my nerves. Isabella entered without knocking, never one to wait for an invitation when something was on her mind. "They didn't just come for a reunion, did they?" she asked, her voice steady, yet knowing. I sighed, the weight of the truth pulling at me like a stone lodged in my chest. "No." She crossed the room, stopping in front of me, arms crossed, expecting nothing but honesty. "Tell me." And so I did. The name I hadn't spoken in years, the name I thought I had buried for good. Nico Vitrano. Her blood ran cold. I saw it in her eyes. The Vitrano Syndicate was a ghost from the past, a name that carried with it a legacy of death and vengeance. They didn't deal in money. They dealt in blood. And they didn't forget. Lucas tried to go clean, moved his family to Berlin, started a private security firm, but they got caught up with the wrong client. Vitrano's men came looking for intel. Lamar tried to protect them. There was a shootout. They escaped, but just barely. They came here because there's no safer place than under our roof. But even as I said it, I knew it was a double-edged sword. They weren't just running from the past. They were dragging it with them, but they brought danger with them. Isabella's whisper was barely audible, but it was enough. "Yes, and it's coming." I could feel it in the air, the tension, the inevitable storm on the horizon. We had prepared. But as the days went by, I knew there was no amount of preparation that could shield us from what was coming. The attack came at dawn, swift and brutal. The sound of gunfire broke the silence like a warning shot, and suddenly, the estate was alive with the chaos of war. We moved as a unit, silent, deadly. Every strike, every move calculated. No room for mistakes. "You saved my son," Lucas said to me later, his voice rough with emotion. I shook my head. "We're bonded now. Family." As the last of the Vitrano men disappeared into the wind, I stood with my brothers, the weight of everything that had just transpired settling heavily on my shoulders. But it was over, at least for now. Isabella's soft presence beside me was the only thing that anchored me in that moment. Her hand in mine, steady, sure. "I thought I lost you." She kissed my palm, her voice a soft whisper. "You didn't. You never will." And for the first time in weeks, as I closed my eyes, I allowed myself a moment of peace. In this world, shadows never sleep. But for tonight, at least we could rest. We were more than survivors. We were the storm, and we would always rise. Chapter 5, Blood That Binds. Zane's voice was low and thick with emotion as he relived the days that had shifted everything in their lives. The past few weeks had been a blend of healing and reawakening, an awakening of a family he hadn't expected to rebuild. He leaned back in the study chair, eyes tracing the familiar cracks in the woodwork as he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of secrets and promises. The sun hung low over the Corrin estate, casting soft amber light through the trees, as if wrapping the world in a golden embrace. It had been 3 weeks since the attack, and though the scars of battle still lingered in the shadows, a quiet peace had settled once more. The children trained daily, their bond only growing stronger in the aftermath. I found myself more present these days, spending time with each child, laughing more often, allowing myself to breathe. Isabella noticed it too. She noticed how I seemed lighter, how the weight that had once pressed down on my chest had finally loosened. Perhaps it was the reunion with my brothers that had stitched up old wounds I hadn't even realized were still open. Or perhaps it was the way the children had stood together in the chaos, unified, unwavering, showing me that this family wasn't just surviving this life, they were mastering it. But I knew, I felt it in the air. Fate had one more card to play. It began with a letter, delivered by an elderly woman, frail and shaken, clutching the envelope like it was a relic of something long buried. Isabella found her at the gate just after noon, the woman barely able to keep her hand steady. I was told to bring this to Zane Corrin. The woman's voice was frail, each word weighted with the kind of sorrow that only a mother's anguish could carry. I promised their mother I never would, but I can't watch them suffer anymore. Isabella didn't need to ask. She took the letter from her, feeling the chill of the moment in her bones. Something was shifting. Something was about to break open. She brought it to me quietly, like she already knew what it would say before I even opened it. "Someone left this for you," Isabella said softly, her voice low, with an unease I couldn't ignore. She handed it to me, her fingers brushing mine as if trying to anchor me before I faced whatever waited inside. I didn't speak. I simply opened the envelope, the seal cracking in a sound too loud in the silence. My eyes scanned the page, and I felt the air rush out of me. The words blurred for a moment, but not the impact, not the weight of what I was reading. I reached into the drawer, fingers trembling as I pulled out an old photograph, one I hadn't touched in over 2 decades. It was a picture of a woman I never should have known, a mistake in the chaos of youth. She'd carried the consequences of that mistake for years. "They're here," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My voice was tight, 2 of them, twins, a boy and a girl, 22. Isabella's gasp was the only sound that filled the space before her words followed. "Zane," her voice cracked like glass, too fragile for the weight of the truth. "They're mine." 2 days later, they arrived. Rain and Iceland. Rain stood tall, his dark hair pulled into a knot at the nape of his neck, eyes as stormy blue as my own. Iceland walked beside him, every step graceful, yet fierce, her dark hair braided back, her face a perfect mirror of my jawline, but softened by Isabella's gentleness. They looked exhausted, like they had been running for too long. I met them at the gates. No one else was with me. They were mine, and the world was about to feel it. "You don't know us," Rain spoke first, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "But we know you. Our mother hated you," Iceland continued, the softness of her voice masking the hardness in her eyes. "Said you abandoned us. But we know the truth now. She pushed us away, gave everything to her new husband's kids, and left us with nothing." "We didn't come for sympathy," Rain said, his tone colder now. "We came for answers, for a name, for blood." I couldn't speak. I stood there, my chest tightening, feeling the world spin around me. I took a step forward, the ache of years spent apart crashing over me like a wave. "You're not just blood," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're mine, and you always will be." Isabella stepped forward then, the warmth of her presence like a balm to the raw wound of my soul. She opened her arms to them, to my children, my blood. "I always wanted a bigger family," she said with a smile that could heal worlds. "I was just waiting for the rest of you to come home." Iceland, stunned, glanced at her. "You're not angry?" Isabella gently tucked a lock of hair behind Iceland's ear. "No, darling, I'm grateful." You didn't just find Zane, you found me too. And I'll fight just as fiercely for you as I do for the others. Rain's throat bobbed as emotion filled his eyes. Even after everything, Isabella's smile was soft, unwavering, especially after everything. Days passed quickly. It didn't take long for the siblings to bond. Rain and Alessandro sparred, testing each other's skills with quiet grins. Matteo and Rain found common ground in strategy. Hours spent together in the war room analyzing everything. Iceland and Evangeline, Isadora and Matteo, each of them finding pieces of themselves in each other. And Luca, ever proud, looked at Rain and declared, "Not bad for a long-lost brother." It was late that night when all 7 of them crowded into the media room, laughing and joking, sharing stories of childhoods they had lived in parallel, some filled with love, some with longing. I stood at the doorway, watching them, watching my children, all of them, together. And for the first time in years, my heart felt impossibly full. Later, Isabella joined me. She looped her arm through mine and leaned her head on my shoulder. "They belong here," she whispered. "I never thought I'd see them. I thought I'd lost that chance." She smiled, the warmth of it flooding through me. "You were never meant to lose them, just meant to wait." I pulled her closer. "You're the reason they stayed, the reason this family works." She kissed me softly, her words barely a breath against my skin. "No, we are." The next morning, I called the family together under the olive trees. The twins sat nervously among their siblings, unsure of what to expect. But I knew what I had to say. Family is more than blood. It's an honor, loyalty, sacrifice. Some of you were born into this legacy. Some of you fought to earn it. But all of you, you are Corin. I turned to Rain and Iceland. You carry my name now, my protection, my love, and this family is your home, forever. The twins stood, emotion thick in their eyes. "I always felt like we belonged somewhere," Iceland whispered. Rain nodded, his eyes full of something I couldn't name. "Now we know where." And then, in a moment that would be etched in my heart forever, the siblings surged forward, wrapping each other in a massive embrace. Laughter, arms, and tears tangled together in a portrait of perfect, imperfect love. Isabella whispered to me, her voice full of meaning, "Now you're truly whole." I smiled through the tears, my voice barely a whisper. Finally, Chapter 6, Shadows at the Gate. Zane's voice cut through the tension that had thickened in the air, a voice forged in the darkest corners of the world, now resonating in the echo of the estate's silence. As the night settled, his thoughts flickered between the present and the weight of what loomed ahead. The memories of battles fought, the taste of bloodshed still lingering on his tongue, and the quiet peace he'd allowed himself for a moment, the kind of peace that felt almost foreign. Yet beneath it all, he knew the storm wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Nightfall descended like a velvet curtain over the Corin estate, silencing the trees, dimming the stars, and ushering in a stillness that felt almost unnatural. The world outside was quiet, but in my chest, the fire never truly went out. It simmered, barely restrained, a beast waiting to be unleashed. And tonight, something felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. I had allowed myself, for the first time in years, to feel whole, to feel peace. But even that tranquility felt like a lie. Something was moving just beneath the surface. An old instinct, a warning. It wasn't done with me yet. Rain sat on the rooftop, his legs dangling over the edge, his eyes distant as he stared into the horizon, beyond the estate, beyond the quiet hills, to the city lights that seemed to pulse with chaos. Iceland joined him a few minutes later, her soft footfalls barely audible on the shingles. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked, her voice soft, but sharp with understanding. Rain shook his head, the weight of his thoughts heavy on his shoulders. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart." Iceland sat down beside him, the silence between them comfortable, but filled with the unspoken. "It won't." "You don't know that," he replied, his words laced with the frustration of a lifetime of battles fought in the dark. "I do," she whispered, her voice steady, "because for the first time, we're not alone." They sat like that for a while, watching, listening, waiting. Below them, in the garden, a figure moved through the shadows. Zane. I stood beneath the olive tree, my fingers brushing the bark, memories swirling like the wind around me. What do you think he's doing? Rain's voice broke the silence. Iceland's eyes softened, a knowing look passing between them. Remembering, she murmured, or grieving. Rain glanced at her. Grieving what? The years he lost, she said quietly. I didn't need to look up to know they were watching me. The years that had shaped me, the decisions made in blood and shadow, had cost more than just allies. They had stolen moments, taken time I would never get back. But the war never stops. The fight doesn't wait for you to mourn. Isabella was by the window in our bedroom, her gaze distant as she stared out at the silent estate. The stillness was almost oppressive, a thick fog of expectation that filled the room. I approached her, slipping my arms around her waist without a word. She didn't need to speak, and neither did I. The weight of the coming storm was enough to steal words from our mouths. I turned her slowly, brushing her hair back as my lips met hers. Slow, tender, the promise of everything we had built and everything we would face together. The kiss was more than just a simple touch. It was an anchor, a binding force between two souls already too intertwined to pull apart. Our clothes slipped away, forgotten in the haze of heat and urgency. She pulled me down onto the bed, our bodies molding together in a silence that felt more meaningful than any words could convey. The world outside ceased to exist. Only the heat of skin against skin, the mingling of breath, the kind of love that didn't need to be spoken. It simply was. Fierce, sacred, eternal. I need you, I whispered against her skin, my voice raw with the intensity of everything I'd ever felt and everything that was still to come. You have me, she answered, her voice steady, even as her body trembled beneath mine. And in that moment I did. I had her, and that was all I needed. The morning arrived with an unnatural stillness, a quiet that hung over the estate like a premonition. The calm before the storm. A black car sat idling outside the gates, unfamiliar, unmarked, and ominous. Luca was the first to notice, his eyes sharp even as he wiped the sweat from his brow after a grueling training session. Who the hell? Within seconds, the perimeter lit up with motion. Security scrambled into position. I emerged from the war room, flanked by Matteo and Alessandro, Isabella by my side, her heels clicking like thunder on the marble floors. The car door opened slowly. A single man stepped out, tall, slim, dressed in a tailored gray suit, his gloved hands pristine despite the summer heat. A thin scar cut across his lip, twisting his smirk into something unreadable. Zane Corin, he said, his voice cold and clipped with an accent that spoke of faraway lands. My name is Nikolai Vetrovin. I come bearing a reminder. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I simply stepped forward, my gaze cutting through him like a blade. You have 30 seconds to explain why you're still breathing. Nikolai chuckled, unfazed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. I bring a message. From the circle. The air grew thick with tension. The circle. That name, long thought dead, buried in the ruins of our past. I felt Matteo's gaze on me, his face darkening. The circle's been dormant for years, Matteo said, his voice a growl. Dormant, Nikolai replied, his smirk widening, is not the same as dead. He tossed a black envelope onto the ground, the sound of it landing like a warning shot in the dead silence. Isabella bent to retrieve it before I could. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she opened it. And inside, just a single card. One empire must fall. One legacy must end. The game begins at midnight. No signature. But I knew. We all did. The circle. They were back. Nikolai's smirk never wavered. Consider this a revival. I stepped forward, my voice a growl. Step foot on my land again, and I'll bury you where you stand. I'm counting on it, he said, his voice dripping with mockery, before turning and vanishing into the car. The mood inside the estate shifted like a tide. The calm was gone. The war was back. Training intensified. Guards doubled. Weapons were unlocked. We were no longer waiting for the storm to find us. It was here. Rain and Iceland watched everything with sharpened eyes, their stance no longer uncertain, but full of purpose. The moment had arrived. We fight, Iceland asked, her blade glinting beneath the garden lights. I nodded. We prepare first. Fight only when we must. Rain's lips curved into a dark smile. That's still a yes. That night, Lamar and Lucas arrived, my most trusted allies, with their families in tow. Lamar, broad-shouldered and commanding, stepped from the SUV with his wife, Celine, and their son, Kale. Lucas, quiet but lethal, arrived with his twin daughters, Amira and Saria. We got your message, Lamar said, clasping my forearm. We stand with you, no matter what. Lucas nodded, his eyes cold with determination. The circle won't see dawn, not if we burn the night first. Their families were welcomed into the fold, like blood. Isabella saw to it. The war began at midnight, but it ended before sunrise. I led the final assault, my brothers and allies moving like shadows through the fortress, striking fast, striking hard. The circle's arrogance was their downfall. When I found Nikolai in the main chamber, seated on a throne of his own delusions, I didn't speak. I didn't need to. You lose, I said, standing over him, my gun steady in my hand. He sneered. You can kill me, but there will always be another. A shot rang out, and his body crumpled to the ground. No, I said softly, my voice cold. There won't. By dawn, the estate was silent again, not in fear, but in victory. Isabella stood at the gates, her arms wrapped around the children. I approached, blood still staining my gloves. It's done, I said, my voice low, my heart steady. Isabella wrapped her arms around me. Then we begin again. I looked out over the hills, where smoke rose from the ashes of the circle's defeat. Another empire has fallen, I whispered, and ours still stands. Rain stepped forward, stronger than ever. Iceland smiled, together. And in that moment, I knew it. The world had witnessed our rise. The Korhans were not just survivors. We were destiny. The storm had passed, and we ruled it all. Chapter 7, The Price of Power. Zane's voice resonated like a low thunderclap, steady and commanding. The room seemed to tighten with the weight of his words, the silence pressing down around them like a palpable thing. The world bent beneath the Korhan's influence. News anchors spoke their name with hushed reverence. Politicians sought private meetings behind closed doors. Rival families, once arrogant in their wealth, now bartered their loyalty in exchange for peace. The Korhans were no longer whispered about in underground circles. They were spoken of in boardrooms, royal courts, and criminal enclaves as the undisputed pinnacle of power. They had dismantled the last of the Vetravan Empire and crushed Nikolai's legacy beneath their boots. One by one, the empires that had dared stand against them either crumbled or swore fealty. I watched it unfold, the empire we had built, the respect we commanded. Every deal, every meeting, every strategy laid bare was an affirmation of what we had become, a dynasty. But even as the weight of that power settled across our shoulders like a crown, I knew better than anyone that power was never truly ours to claim. It was borrowed, fragile, and as fickle as the winds. Power came at a price, and I had already paid in ways that no one would ever fully understand. Isabella stood beside me on the balcony of our estate, watching the sleek black convoys arrive, each vehicle a reminder of how far we had come and how much further we still had to go. The diplomats, the political players, all of them came here for one reason, us. Some came in fear, others in flattery, but all came to court the storm we had become. Isabella, my queen, was not just my wife. She had become a force in her own right, her mind sharper than any blade I had ever known. They feared her more than they feared me, and rightly so. She had bent the course of nations with nothing but a glance. The world called her La Sombra di Viridia, the shadow of Viridia, and I couldn't help but admire her from where I stood, knowing that she was more than capable of tearing apart those who dared challenge us. The war room buzzed with activity as Rain and Matteo ran simulations, analyzing threats, cyber attacks, and potential disruptions before they could even manifest. Iceland, with her mind for rebuilding, worked tirelessly to turn Viridia's war-torn districts into thriving areas once more. Her work wasn't just about restoration. It was about domination, about crafting a future where our empire wasn't just feared, but revered. The blood of the Korhans flowed in her veins, and she had proven it time and time again. Lamar, my closest confidant, had been given his own charge, forming an elite council of loyal families. Each family held a province, a piece of the puzzle that made up the world we controlled. Lucas, the silent shadow, had disappeared back into the underworld, his presence a rumor, his kills the stuff of legend. Together, we had done what no one else could. We had built an empire from the ashes of those who had once sought to destroy us. But like all empires, it was never truly safe. It began with the kind of quiet precision that only the most skilled assassins could manage. A man disguised as a diplomat had entered this state, carrying a cyanide capsule hidden in his molar and a sniper rifle in a violin case. He never made it past the courtyard. Lucas's daughters, Amira and Saria, intercepted him before the estate's outer defenses even knew he was there. Amira, with a lethal grace she had inherited from her father, had struck first, her blade at his throat in a blur of motion. Saria, ever the shadow, had dragged him into the darkness before the security team could even respond. Their silence spoke volumes. They were born for this, trained for this. The interrogation revealed little. The assassin had been paid in untraceable currency with only one instruction: end the Koran reign. I didn't sleep that night. The world had already tasted my blood, and now it came back to claim more. I stood at the foot of our bed, my eyes locked on Isabella's form, the moonlight spilling over her like a halo. She looked so serene, untouched by the storm raging just outside our walls. She was everything to me, the calm before the chaos. "They'll never stop trying," I murmured, my voice barely audible as the weight of the world pressed down on me. Isabella stirred, but she didn't open her eyes. She knew the game as well as I did. "Then they'll die trying," she replied, her voice steady, unwavering. "We're worth the risk." Her words grounded me, just as they always did. I leaned down and kissed her shoulder, my hand tracing the familiar curve of her waist. I slid under the sheets beside her, pulling her close. The world outside could burn, and we would still be here. Our bodies met in quiet fire, the rhythm of our movements a reflection of everything we had built and fought for. The next morning, the war room was filled with the same tension that had plagued me the night before. Maps of the world glowed beneath the glass table. Reports streamed in from every sector: intel, finances, alliances. The Koran dynasty had achieved what no one thought possible: dominance. But peace, I knew, was never permanent. "We've achieved peace through dominance," I said, my voice hard, cutting through the silence. "But peace is never permanent. From this moment on, we evolve, we sharpen, we expand." Isabella, ever the strategist, added, "Our enemies aren't just criminals or politicians anymore. They're ideologies. They're the ghosts of the empire's past. If we want to hold this power, we must outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast them all." Matteo leaned forward, his eyes locked on the map. "What's our next move?" I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper, the weight of the next phase settling like a heavy cloak around me. "We become the myth they pray to and the nightmare they run from." And so, with that declaration, we entered the next phase of our reign, not as a family seeking survival, but as a force poised to reshape the world itself. The Koran dynasty was no longer just a name whispered in the dark. It was a storm that would change the course of history. Power had come with its price, but that price had always been worth it. Because in the end, we weren't just surviving. We were building something that would outlast everything else. We were shaping the future, and they would never see us coming. Chapter 8, Beneath the Crown. Zane's voice echoed in the quiet of the study, the weight of the world pressing against his shoulders. Even as the empire expanded, As the dynasty's power bled across continents, there was always a sense that the crown he wore was too heavy, too fragile. And when cracks began to appear in the walls of the estate, it was more than just the weight of the business. It was the weight of family, of legacy, of everything he had built with blood and sweat. Viridia's reconstruction surged under Corin's guidance. From shattered ruins emerged libraries, hospitals, and military academies. The children, once sheltered from the world, now stood as its architects. Each day felt like a new challenge, a new battlefield. Luca, my son, my shadow in the night, was out in South America, fighting battles most would never see. His hands stained with sins that no one would ever speak of, his network extending into corners of the world most had forgotten. He operated in silence, moving through the shadows like a ghost, doing what needed to be done before the storm even arrived. Isadora and Evangeline were my other architects. Together with Iceland, they rebuilt the foundation of the nation, starting with its youth. Their curriculum didn't just teach how to read or write, it taught power. It taught strategy. It taught survival. No child in Viridia would grow up unaware of the dangers, of the need to rise above the rest. They would be armed, not with weapons, but with knowledge, strength, and wisdom, tools that could shape the world without a single shot fired. Alessandro, my diplomat. He spoke with the elegance of a serpent, brokering deals with a smile and a gaze that never faltered. His words were silk, but beneath them, steel. He could make peace where there was none, and destroy an empire with the same hands that offered a handshake. He was a master of chess, playing with kings and pawns alike, but he always knew which moves would give him the checkmate. Rain and Matteo, twins, but different in every way. Rain, the politician, with his cunning mind and ability to manipulate governments with a keystroke. Matteo, the tactician, the warrior. The digital world was his battlefield, and with it, he controlled more than most governments could dream of. Together, they controlled the invisible forces that held the world together and buried anyone who dared stand in our way. But still, the crown grew heavier. Zane and Isabella expanded the dynasty's influence into Europe and Asia, placing Corin operatives in key positions of industry, technology, and policy. A series of covert financial takeovers gave them control over multinational banks, AI defense grids, and clean energy infrastructure. Global dependence on Corin-owned systems meant that even world leaders who resented their power could no longer afford to oppose them. We had infiltrated the very heart of the world, from the boardrooms to the war rooms, from policy to profit. The Corin name was synonymous with power. No one could move without our permission. We owned more than companies. We owned nations, economies, and the future itself. But the moment we took what we wanted, the moment we seized the reins with ruthless precision, the moment we thought we had it all, there came the scandal. A glittering gala in Cairo, attended by dignitaries and criminal elites alike, a scandal erupted. A private recording of Zane speaking with a known arms dealer surfaced, edited, twisted, and leaked to the press with perfect timing. It painted him as a warmonger, hungry for chaos. They knew exactly when to strike, knew the right moment to poison the air with doubt. The world paused, questions began to swirl, and whispers of betrayal filled every corner of the globe. I didn't flinch. I never flinch. He summoned the arms dealer. 3 days later, his entire network was crushed. I watched as the last remnants of the man's empire were reduced to ash. The bodies floated in harbors across the Mediterranean. His warehouses burned, his accounts frozen. And I was still standing. Let them see, I said, my voice calm and cold. Let them remember what happens when they bite the hand that rules them. But even as I stood before the cameras, even as I silenced the world with one sentence, cracks began to form in my family's foundation. Rain disappeared for longer stretches of time, his knuckles bruised, his mind somewhere dark. When Iceland confronted him beneath the olive tree, I could feel the weight of his unspoken fears in the air. "You're chasing ghosts," she said, kneeling beside him. "I'm making sure they never find us." "We already won, Rain." His hand stilled as he looked at her. "That's why they'll never forgive us." A few days later, I called my sons together, Rain, Matteo, Luca, and Alessandro. The underground training hall was quiet, the air thick with anticipation, tension crackling like static. They stood in a circle, waiting for me to speak, waiting for the order. But this wasn't about orders. This was about something more, something that could bring us together or break us apart. I paced slowly, my eyes locked on each of them. Each of you is powerful. Each of you has your own battlefield. But this family, this name, Corin, was built on unity, not ego. Matteo folded his arms, his gaze unwavering. You think we're not unified? I stopped in front of him, my gaze hard. I think you're walking your own wars without leaning on each other. Luca looked away, his expression guarded. We handle it. I moved closer, my voice lowering. You do, but I didn't build this empire for you to carry it alone. I built it so that together you'd be unstoppable. Alessandro raised an eyebrow, the hint of a challenge in his voice. So what? We have to be more like you. I smiled slowly, a touch of pride creeping in. No, you have to be better than me. Rain's voice was low, barely a whisper in the room. And what if we're too far gone? I stepped in front of him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Then you fight your way back. We don't abandon our own. Not ever. For a moment, there was only silence. But it was a silence that carried weight. And in that silence, something shifted. The bonds, once stretched thin, began to tighten again. Later that night, Isabella walked the halls, her heels clicking against the marble. The house was silent, but the air hummed with something heavier. I found her in the rose garden, sitting on a marble bench, draped in a silk robe that shimmered in the moonlight. She looked up at me as I approached. Still thinking about the leak? She asked, her voice soft but knowing. I'm thinking about how quickly the world turns, I said, kneeling before her. How fragile power is even when you own it. I parted the folds of her robe, my fingers tracing the softness of her skin. She smiled, the faintest hint of a challenge in her eyes. Then let me remind you that we still own everything. And I kissed her, slow, deliberate, molten, as I trailed kisses down her collarbone, down her stomach, until she lay back against the bench, the garden surrounding us like an embrace. I reminded her of the truth. We were more than rulers. We were unstoppable. I worshipped her in that moment, each movement a testament to our bond, to our empire, to everything we had built together. And when we collapsed into each other, the world outside faded into the background. I need you like this, she whispered, her voice trembling as I held her close. I kissed her temple, my word to promise. You'll always have me. And for that moment, the world could wait. We were the storm, and nothing would ever break us apart. Chapter 9, The Fire Within. The Grand Council chamber was suffocating, thick with the weight of suspicion and the kind of tension that curled in the air like smoke, making it hard to breathe. The usual murmur of hushed conversations was gone, replaced by a stifling silence that felt too heavy, too cold. We had just come off a victory, albeit a hard-fought one. And now this? The Corin estate had been a sanctuary, an impenetrable fortress of loyalty and power. But in a single moment, all of that crumbled. Celine's face twisted in shock, a breathless gasp escaping her lips as she clutched her throat. Her fingers were stained with blood, her own blood. Her body trembled, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The room fell into chaos immediately. Men and women who had always been steady in the storm now scattered like leaves in the wind. My eyes locked on her, then quickly snapped to Lamar as he surged forward, his voice roaring, calling for help, demanding answers. Poison. The word passed silently through the room, unspoken but understood. A shadow had slipped into our fortress, unseen, undetected. The assassin's touch was subtle, but its impact was anything but. Within seconds, the estate was on lockdown. The guards, usually stationed in calm vigilance, were now in a frenzy, checking every corner, every possible hiding place. The cameras flickered to life, capturing every whispered conversation, every fleeting movement. I stood there, watching the chaos unfold, yet I felt distant, detached, like I was observing from a place far removed from wasn't the first time a threat had entered our home. But this was different. Lamar was a tempest. I had seen the man composed under the heaviest of pressure, but this had him unraveling at the seams. His rage was palpable, his voice breaking as he roared through the halls, demanding names, suspects, any lead. It was raw, primal. He promised retribution, something far worse than anything the enemy could have imagined. But in the war room, I remained calm, cold even. The only thing that mattered now was survival, and survival demanded control. Lamar's fury was justified, but it wasn't useful. I clasped his shoulder, grounding him with a steady grip, my voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. We will find who did this. They will pay in blood. Isabella entered the war room like a force of nature, always so composed, her voice an anchor in the storm. "Panic is our enemy now," she said, her tone low but ironclad. "We dissect this carefully. We root out the traitor with precision." And that was the difference. While everyone else scrambled, Isabella and I focused. We were not simply reacting. We were planning, calculating. We would not be blindsided again. The estate became a fortress of suspicion. Every servant, every guard, every council member was under scrutiny. Loyalty was tested, alibis examined, and surveillance footage combed through frame by frame. But it was all shadows, fleeting movements caught on grainy cameras, nothing concrete. And the feeling of betrayal began to seep into the very walls, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. For 2 days, Celine hovered between life and death. Lamar never left her side, his face drawn, haunted. He spoke to her, whispering promises of vengeance, his voice breaking every time she gasped for air. I couldn't offer him comfort. There was nothing to say. The damage had been done. That night, Isabella met with our daughters in a room lit only by flickering candles, their scent mingling with the faint, bitter tang of sandalwood. She poured wine into crystal glasses, each drop ringing sharp in the silence. Her gaze swept over Isadora, Evangeline, and Iceland. They were poised, but the tension was still there, lingering beneath the surface. "We have been betrayed from within," Isabella said quietly. "Someone wearing our colors has dealt a fatal blow." Evangeline's eyes flashed with fury. "One of us? How can that be?" Isabella's expression remained calm, though her eyes held an edge of something colder. "This is not a simple act of hate. It's a calculated strike from someone who knows us intimately, our weaknesses, our routines, our secrets." Isadora clenched her jaw, her fingers tapping against the table in a steady rhythm. "What do you want from us?" "To be vigilant beyond what you think possible," Isabella said. "You are Coran women. Your minds are sharp, but your instincts must be sharper. We have no room for hesitation." Iceland's voice was calm, unwavering. "We will uncover the rot hiding among us. No shadow will be left unturned." Isabella's eyes flashed, sharp as knives. "And when we find the traitor, we will make an example so terrifying it will silence all who dare betray this family." Evangeline's voice softened, but the weight of her question hung heavy in the air. "But if it's someone we love, someone we trusted?" Isabella's smile was cruel, beautiful in its viciousness. "Then love becomes a memory buried beneath the earth. Betrayal leaves no space for mercy." The room fell silent. The weight of her words pressed down on all of us, and for a moment, none of us dared to speak. Later that night, I found Isabella in the hallway, the scent of burned sage lingering in the air. She had been through so much, and yet she never faltered. I could see it in her eyes. This was more than just a betrayal. This was a war, and we had been thrust into the heart of it. "She's stable," I said quietly, the words hanging heavy between us. "But this changes everything." Isabella nodded, her voice soft but unwavering. "Our reach has made us visible, too visible. Power attracts shadows." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then we remind the world. The Korhans command the silence. We are the storm no one sees coming." Orders were issued swiftly and with ruthless precision. Compromised alliances were severed. Names disappeared from our ledgers, erased as if they had never existed. Strongholds that had once been hidden in the shadows were burned to the ground, reduced to ashes under the cover of darkness. We would bleed, yes, but we would not do so without extracting a price that would leave nothing but ruin in its wake. And somewhere beyond the estate, in the quiet shadows, the traitor watched, patient, calculating, waiting for the storm to find them. But the war wasn't over. It had only changed its name. Chapter 9, The Fire Within. The Grand Council chamber was suffocating, thick with the weight of suspicion and the kind of tension that curled in the air like smoke, making it hard to breathe. The usual murmur of hushed conversations was gone, replaced by a stifling silence that felt too heavy, too cold. We had just come off a victory, albeit a hard-fought one. And now this? The Corrin estate had been a sanctuary, an impenetrable fortress of loyalty and power. But in a single moment, all of that crumbled. Celine's face twisted in shock, a breathless gasp escaping her lips as she clutched her throat. Her fingers were stained with blood, her own blood. Her body trembled, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The room fell into chaos immediately. Men and women who had always been steady in the storm now scattered like leaves in the wind. My eyes locked on her, then quickly snapped to Lamar as he surged forward, his voice roaring, calling for help, demanding answers. Poison. The word passed silently through the room, unspoken but understood. A shadow had slipped into our fortress, unseen, undetected. The assassin's touch was subtle, but its impact was anything but. Within seconds, the estate was on lockdown. The guards, usually stationed in calm vigilance, were now in a frenzy, checking every corner, every possible hiding place. The cameras flickered to life, capturing every whispered conversation, every fleeting movement. I stood there, watching the chaos unfold, yet I felt distant, detached, like I was observing from a place far removed from my own body. This wasn't the first time a threat had entered our home, but this was different. Lamar was a tempest. I had seen the man composed under the heaviest of pressure, but this had him unraveling at the seams. His rage was palpable, his voice breaking as he roared through the halls, demanding names, suspects, any lead. It was raw, primal. He promised retribution, something far worse than anything the enemy could have imagined. But in the war room, I remained calm, cold even. The only thing that mattered now was survival, and survival demanded control. Lamar's fury was justified, but it wasn't useful. I clasped his shoulder, grounding him with a steady grip, my voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. We will find who did this. They will pay in blood. Isabella entered the war room like a force of nature, always so composed, her voice an anchor in the storm. "Panic is our enemy now," she said, her tone low but ironclad. "We dissect this carefully. We root out the traitor with precision." And that was the difference. While everyone else scrambled, Isabella and I focused. We were not simply reacting. We were planning, calculating. We would not be blindsided again. The estate became a fortress of suspicion. Every servant, every guard, every council member was under scrutiny. Loyalty was tested, alibis examined, and surveillance footage combed through frame by frame. But it was all shadows, fleeting movements caught on grainy cameras, nothing concrete. And the feeling of betrayal began to seep into the very walls, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. For 2 days, Celine hovered between life and death. Lamar never left her side, his face drawn, haunted. He spoke to her, whispering promises of vengeance, his voice breaking every time she gasped for air. I couldn't offer him comfort. There was nothing to say. The damage had been done. That night, Isabella met with our daughters in a room lit only by flickering candles, their scent mingling with the faint, bitter tang of sandalwood. She poured wine into crystal glasses, each drop ringing sharp in the silence. Her gaze swept over Isadora, Evangeline, and Iceland. They were poised, but the tension was still there, lingering beneath the surface. "We have been betrayed from within," Isabella said quietly. "Someone wearing our colors has dealt a fatal blow." Evangeline's eyes flashed with fury. "One of us?" How can that be? Isabella's expression remained calm, though her eyes held an edge of something colder. This is not a simple act of hate. It's a calculated strike from someone who knows us intimately, our weaknesses, our routines, our secrets. Isadora clenched her jaw, her fingers tapping against the table in a steady rhythm. What do you want from us? To be vigilant beyond what you think possible, Isabella said. You are Coran women. Your minds are sharp, but your instincts must be sharper. We have no room for hesitation. Iceland's voice was calm, unwavering. We will uncover the rot hiding among us. No shadow will be left unturned. Isabella's eyes flashed, sharp as knives. And when we find the traitor, we will make an example so terrifying it will silence all who dare betray this family. Evangeline's voice softened, but the weight of her question hung heavy in the air. But if it's someone we love, someone we trusted. Isabella's smile was cruel, beautiful in its viciousness. Then love becomes a memory buried beneath the earth. Betrayal leaves no space for mercy. The room fell silent. The weight of her words pressed down on all of us, and for a moment, none of us dared to speak. Later that night, I found Isabella in the hallway, the scent of burned sage lingering in the air. She had been through so much, and yet she never faltered. I could see it in her eyes. This was more than just a betrayal. This was a war, and we had been thrust into the heart of it. She's stable, I said quietly, the words hanging heavy between us. But this changes everything. Isabella nodded, her voice soft but unwavering. Our reach has made us visible, too visible. Power attracts shadows. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. Then we remind the world. The Korhans command the silence. We are the storm no one sees coming. Orders were issued swiftly and with ruthless precision. Compromised alliances were severed. Names disappeared from our ledgers, erased as if they had never existed. Strongholds that had once been hidden in the shadows were burned to the ground, reduced to ashes under the cover of darkness. We would bleed, yes, but we would not do so without extracting a price that would leave nothing but ruin in its wake. And somewhere beyond the estate, in the quiet shadows, the traitor watched, patient, calculating, waiting for the storm to find them. But the war wasn't over. It had only changed its name. Chapter 10, The Reckoning Beneath the Rose. The rain fell in sheets, a relentless downpour that seemed determined to wash away the sins of the world. It whispered across the estate, sweeping over the cold stone like a reminder of all the things I couldn't control. The thunder rumbled in the distance, steady and ominous, like a heartbeat that grew louder with each passing second. I knew what was coming. We all did. 7 days had passed since the attempt on Celine's life. 7 days since our world had been torn open, exposing the rot that had festered in the dark corners of our empire. I had let that rot grow unchecked for far too long, trusting the wrong people. But trust, I learned quickly, was a fragile thing. It could break in an instant, and when it did, it carried the weight of destruction with it. Celine lived, barely, but she would survive. She had to, not just for herself, but for all of us. Because in this game, there was no room for weakness, no room for grief, only strength, only the cold, calculated response of a king whose empire had been threatened. I returned to the estate with Lamar and Lucas, the hum of the armored SUVs barely audible over the beating rain. The doors opened and I stepped out first. Black wool coat, rain slicking back my dark hair, eyes locked forward, unyielding, unflinching. For a moment, I stood still, the weight of the world settling on my shoulders like it always did. But then I met her eyes, Isabella's. She was standing in the courtyard, just like always, her gaze cutting through the storm like a beacon. Whatever weight I carried, it softened when I looked at her, just for her. I crossed the courtyard in long strides, my boots heavy against the soaked ground, and wrapped her in my arms. For that brief moment, there was nothing but her warmth against my chest, her breath steady, grounding me in the chaos that threatened to swallow us whole. I found it, I murmured against her hair. The truth, the rot. She pulled back, her brow furrowing, but there was no fear in her eyes, only the sharpness of someone who had long since learned to navigate the darkness. What truth? My gaze flicked to Lamar, who nodded grimly, his left hand still wrapped in a blood-stained bandage. We hit the Montenegro compound, Lamar rasped. They didn't strike Celine for power. They did it for revenge. Her family sheltered a rebel once. He killed one of their patriarchs decades ago. They never forgot. I could see the realization hit Isabella like a blow, but there was no time to linger in it. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture it formed was one we weren't ready to face. And this was blood for blood, Isabella whispered, understanding sinking in. Lucas stepped forward, his voice low and lethal. Worse, someone gave them our intel. Everything. The poison wasn't sourced outside. It came from our stores. A quiet horror rippled through the courtyard, but no one moved. No one flinched. We didn't mourn weakness. We eradicated it. The truth was laid bare before us. Someone inside our walls had betrayed us, and I would make them pay for it. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small, battered photo album. The leather was torn at the corners, the inside worse. Photos, blueprints, movements. They knew us. They knew everything about us. I handed it to Isabella, my heart tightening in my chest as she flipped through the pages. The first page, her and me, smiling on a balcony, vulnerable and intimate. The next, Alessandro at a cafe, Isadora in the orchard, Evangeline sketching in the greenhouse. Rain moving like a shadow through the corridors, unaware of the eyes that tracked his every step. Each image circled in red. Targets. Isabella's hands didn't tremble as she handed the album back to Lucas, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. Burn it. The album hissed as it disappeared into the flame, and with it, the last remnants of the betrayal we had lived with. It was time to move forward, and when we moved with vengeance. That night, we gathered in the inner sanctum, the room lit only by the flickering light of candles, symbols of the vengeance we would unleash. Celine walked in on her own, pale but unbroken. Lamar rose instantly to steady her, but she waved him off, jaw set in determination. She had survived death, and she would face this standing like a queen. Rain stood beside Iceland and Alessandro, his presence calm but unreadable. The shadows clung to him like allies, and his silence spoke volumes more than any words could. I stepped forward, my voice cold enough to still the flame. The traitor is still among us, but they made one fatal mistake. They thought we would break. I let the silence press down before continuing. We've enacted phase 1 of Operation Thornfall. Communications dark. All alliances reassessed. Every enemy will receive one message. You strike at one Corin. You declare war on us all. Matteo's voice cut through the tension. And if the traitor is in this room, Isabella's eyes locked on Matteo's, her expression as sharp as a blade. Then I'll slit their throat myself. No one flinched. No one doubted her. Isadora's hand found Evangeline's. Rain's fingers curled around the hilt at his side, and Alessandro studied the room, reading eyes, silences, hesitations. We were ready. The next few hours were a blur, frenzied work, intelligence gathered, systems overridden. But nothing could have prepared us for what came next. Celine's voice broke the stillness. I saw them, just before the poison took me. Green eyes, soulless. She swallowed hard. I knew them. I just can't remember why. I turned to Alessandro, my orders clear. Pull the guest logs. 3 months. Cross-reference Montenegro ties. Any pattern, even the smallest detail, you bring it only to me. Yes, Father, Alessandro replied, his voice unwavering. Midnight in the surveillance wing, and the screens flickered as Alessandro worked in silence. Data streamed in front of him, his eyes scanning the numbers with lethal precision. Then suddenly, a red marker. One name, Camellia Voss. Green eyes. Lifelong friend. Practically raised in the estate. My blood ran cold. I pressed the silent alert, and within minutes, guards stormed the conservatory. Camellia sat alone, sipping wine like a guest at peace. Rain and Iceland entered first, silent, armed, lethal. Their eyes never left her. Isabella faced Camellia, her voice soft but seething with the fire of a mother and queen. "Why?" Camellia smiled, and for the first time I saw the truth in her eyes. There was no remorse, no fear. "Because your family erased mine. I was just a child when it happened. But I remembered. Every birthday, every toast, every laugh in this house. I counted down to vengeance." Lamar stepped forward, his voice heavy with disgust. "You nearly killed Celine." Camelia's smile didn't falter. She was just the beginning. My voice sliced through the tension. She was the end. Rain and Iceland stepped in, their hands swift and unforgiving. Camellia didn't resist. She didn't flinch. As they walked her out, Isabella turned to the family. "Let this be a lesson carved in bone. Betrayal is not endured here. It is answered." The reckoning had come, and its name was Rain Corin, son of Zane, forged in silence, rising in storm.